Good on you?
How's your things going?
Oh, nice. I had my son with me.
Oh, I know. What a blessing, huh?
Yeah, it wasn't long enough,
Yeah, yeah, I get it. And back to work. And
I know.
I was thinking about Wes and Amy because we didn't see him yesterday. We saw him Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But we didn't see him yesterday. I think they just needed to unwind and just get back into the routine, get the kids back in the routine.
Yeah.
I remember as a teacher, I would come back that first Monday and the kids would be off, and I'd be
Morning,
glad to
everybody.
go the same.
Yeah.
Hey, look who's here.
We're all the same, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Daniel. Hey, Christine. Morning, everyone. Running a little bit late because it's cold, so we're all moving a little bit slower. That's our excuse, and we're sticking to it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's good to see everybody here this morning. We are studying from the book of 2 Kings. The book of 2 Kings. Let's get that one there. Okay, so just to kind of back into where we are, Elisha is God's new principal prophet in Israel. This is the part of 2 Kings that kind of deals with Israel more than Judah in the first 9 chapters at least. Basically, we're working up to the demise of the prophecy of what's going to happen to Ahab's household. But in the meantime, we see this guy Elisha comes along. He asks for this great gift from God to have this double portion of Elijah. And Elijah says, well, you ask a lot there, but we'll see what happens. If you see me go up, but then I guess it'll happen. So that's what happens. And we see Elisha do these things that Elijah has done. They parallel a lot of what he's done already. And there's a lot of things going on here. And it's God dealing with his people as a nation, including through the kings. But a lot of it has to do with what is going to happen in the future. A lot of it is forecasting Christianity, in my mind anyway. Whenever I look at these things, it's always in the context of Christianity because that's why we're here. Without Jesus, this would be completely different. It would be a different kind of history for us. So before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Our Holy Father, we are so thankful, Lord, that you have loved us so much that you have given us your Son as an example and for a sacrifice that we may be reconciled to you. Father, we ask and pray and hope that all things we do in this hour would be pleasing to you. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, so we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 4. We're going to finish up chapter 4. There's a lot of things in here. Now, last week, we did the first part of that, first 7 verses, where this widow comes to Elisha. So here's a widow and a prophet. And here's these parallels with Elijah. And she asks him for help because her husband has died in debt. And because of that, the guy who she owes the money to, now it's her debt, is coming to take her sons, which is not that unusual. If you couldn't pay your debt, you would indenture yourself to people so you could pay the debt off. So Elisha tells her to go ask people for containers, as many containers as she can find, pots everywhere. She has this flask of oil. And he tells her, go inside your house, get all the pots from around everywhere, and shut the door in your house, and you and your sons, and then start filling up these pots. And that's what she does. So we see this parallel to Elijah's miracle, this great power that he's having. Now with Elijah, there's some differences that are notable, and I think we'll get into that later. But here's this great thing that happens, and if we put ourselves in that position, it has to be this wonderful thing that happens for this woman, where She's in desperate need, and then God provides these things for her. Okay, now last week I did ask a question, and we'll get into that about faith and miracles, because there's just so many miracles that we're going to see coming up with Elisha. And that has to do with faith and all of that. And we're going to get into that. I'm going to bring it up here after these stories we're going to get into. So just kind of want us to be thinking about the faith of the people, the faith that the miracles generate, because these are the kinds of things that God was doing through Jesus, the very same kind of thing. And we'll talk about that as well. Okay, is there anything that anybody wanted to inject into the conversation before we get to this next section? Okay, so in verses 8 through 37, it's a pretty long read, but it's a very compelling story. Now, this is not a widow, and this is a very compelling woman that Elisha encounters. She's very prominent. She has power. She makes important decisions, which you don't see a lot of in the culture. And so it's a very compelling story in my mind because of who she is and the things that happen to her and all of the things that kind of are projecting towards Christianity. So, starting at verse 8, and it's a long read, but let's read it so we're fresh into the story. Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food, and so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat food. She said to her husband, "Behold, now I perceive that this is a holy man of God passing by us continually. Please, let us make a little walled upper chamber, and let us set a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand. And it shall be, when he comes to this, that he can turn in there." One day when he came there and turned into the upper chamber and rested, then he said to Gehazi, and just kind of note, just pay attention to what's happening here. It's kind of weird when you read it, but there's some weird things going on here. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Call this Shunammite." And when he had called her, she stood before him. He said to him, "Now say to her, behold, you have been careful for us with all this care. What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army?" That's a big deal right there. And she answered, "I live among my own people." So he said, "What then is to be done for her?" And Gehazi answered, "Truly she has no son, and her husband is old." He said, "Call her." When he had called her, she stood in the doorway. And then he said, "At this season next year, you will embrace a son." And she said, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." The woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, as Elisha had said to her. When the son was grown, the day came when he went out to his father to the reapers. He said to his father, my head, my head." And he said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon and then died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, Please send one of the servants and me and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return." He said, "Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." And she said, "It will be well." Noted that she leaves out maybe some important details about why she wants to go. Then she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, Drive and go forward. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you." Then she went and came to the man of God to Mount Carmel, which is pretty far away, likely from Samaria or wherever region they're in. When the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Behold, there is the Shunammite. Please run now to meet her and say to her, 'Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child?' And she answered, 'It is well.' When she came to the man of God, to the hill, she caught hold of his feet, and Gehazi came near to push her away. But the man of God said, 'Let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me.' Then she said, 'Did I ask for a son from my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me?' Then he said to Gehazi, 'Gird up your loins and take thy staff in your hand and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him, and if anyone salutes you, do not answer him, and lay my staff on the lad's face.' The mother of the lad said, 'As the Lord lives, and you yourself live, I will not leave you.' And he arose and followed her. Then Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the lad's face. But there was no sound or response. So he returned to meet him and told him, 'The lad has not awakened.' When Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth and his eyes on his eyes and his hands on his hands. And he stretched himself on him, and the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth, and went up, stretched himself on him, and the lad sneezed 7 times. And the lad opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, 'Call the Shunammite.' So he called her, and when she came in to him, he said, 'Take up your son.' Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground, and she took up her son and went out." So that's a long story, and there's a lot going on in the story that, if you breeze through it like that, you don't. At least I didn't see a lot of what was going on until I started reading it that second and third and fourth times. Does anybody have anything that they noted about the story when they read it? Any thoughts? I mean, this is obviously another parallel of Elijah's miracle that he did, raising the widow's son, in much the same way. And there are some differences in between the two people who received this miracle as well. So, is there anything about this that who is this about? There's my first question. Who is this story about? Anybody have anything on that? Aaron? Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what he did is very much like what we do now, or we're doing for CPR.
That sounds like it, huh?
Yes.
It does sound very much like that.
That made me think of that.
Okay. Anything else? There are many different components in this story. I'm sorry.
Not really. It's about, but it is about the Shunammite woman.
Yes.
But I do have a question, which might not be anything real important, but why is it that he had Gehazi, his servant, speak for him? I'm interested in that.
Okay. Yeah, that should kind of jump out to us, huh, when we read that. Here's a Shunammite woman who wants to come to him, And he, who's he talking to? Well, before the whole miracle of raising the child, here's a Shunammite woman. Is this a faithful woman? Yes. I see one yes. Yeah, people are saying, yes. She's like, I perceive that this is a man of God. So she has a good measure of faith there, right? She's like, we should be hospitable. Now, this is something that Israel was supposed to do anyway, was be hospitable to strangers and that sort of thing. And the culture would actually pride itself on that. To the point where your own livelihood, if you're a farmer, don't pick everything. If something falls, it stays on the ground, and, in the corners of your field. Leave it for the poor. All these things were part of the Israel culture. And here's somebody who's practicing that good hospitality. And she has a measure of faith. She understands this is a man of God. Okay.
She was not an Israelite, though.
Okay.
She was a Gentile.
And she says, when the question to her is, what can I do for you? What does she say? And what does that mean? He asks, you want me to talk to one of the captains of the army, or do you want me to talk to a king for you? That's a pretty big thing to say, especially if he's going to be speaking to a Gentile king. And what is her answer? Aaron?
I don't know if he's offering to speak to her king. It sounds like he was gonna talk to some other king, not hers.
Okay. All right. Like maybe his own king or something. Like, you need some kind of reward for your hospitality. And what is her answer? I live among my own people. She lives in peace. Everything's good with her. She's not looking for, this just shows her good character, I think. She's not looking for a reward of any type. She's just showing good hospitality. So she has a measure of faith towards this guy who's apparently a man of God who comes by. And, Gehazi's coming with it. So to Diane's point, when it comes time for, if I'm Elisha, and I'm really appreciative of this lady showing such great kindness, she has to go to her husband to request all these things. I get the feeling that her husband is like, just, you know what to do, just do what you need to do. She's like the, Proverbs 30 wife, she goes out and does her business and just is like she just complements the marriage in that sense. And she gets to make her own decisions. So she decides to do this thing, and Elisha's very impressed by that. And he wants to do something for her. So he tells Gehazi, go get the woman. And then he tells Gehazi, or he asks Gehazi, when she says she doesn't need anything, he asks, what is he? He looks to Gehazi and says, so what do we do? Why would he do that? Who's the what is Gehazi's station here? What's his job? Intermediary? Yes. What is he doing for his boss? His boss is Elijah, right? Elisha. He's a servant, right? I'm seeing this as I'm looking at this because we know what's going to happen later, right? In the next chapter, we know what's going to happen later already. So that's we have that blessing. He's training Gehazi. Gehazi was likely one of the sons of the prophets. And in the Jewish teachings, this was a school of prophets. And I talked a little bit about that. It might have been because so many prophets were killed earlier under Ahab and Jezebel specifically, that now we have the sons of the prophets. And they need to be trained. And the readings of the old Midrash and Jewish writings was that this was a school of them. And so we see these sons of the prophets come up quite often. And so I'm looking at this like Elisha's trying to train Gehazi. And what we need, I think the scriptures are trying to reveal Gehazi to us because of what happens later with Naaman. And so we see that, Gehazi seems like a decent guy. And what a great thing he says. So he asks Gehazi, what shall we do for this lady? And he says, well, she doesn't have a son. Wow, that's a big deal. Well, okay, you're going to have a son. That's a really big deal, and it seems like a decent thing to say and do. And then the next thing that happens, the big deal that we see that happens later, the son dies. He grows up. He isn't a grown man. He's a lad, is what the way it describes. He goes into the field, and no telling what happened, but he ends up dying. So the next time we see the interaction between Gehazi and Elisha and this woman is where Elisha lives. And what does Elisha do to help this person? Who's going to raise the boy who's supposed to raise this child from the dead? Gehazi. He tells Gehazi, you take my staff, and you go and put it on him and raise him up. And so, and is that the way it happens? We see this journey from Mount Carmel back to wherever it was, maybe a couple of days' journey. It doesn't read, it reads much quicker than that, but it might be 1 or 2 days' journey. Gehazi passes them on the road and gets far enough in front of him where he tries it and it doesn't work. So then he goes back and tells Elisha, I couldn't make it work, sorry. And then we see Elisha go through what he was saying. So we see a lot of things going on here that God's not necessarily talking a whole lot to Elisha. He's helping him, but he's not telling him everything. He didn't even know that this poor woman was really upset that her son died. God wasn't telling him everything. So there's all these little things going on. We have Elisha who's trying to train up this other guy. And Aaron. That is very strange. Why did she leave that out?
It's just speculation. But,
Yes.
she's
You have to put yourself in the woman's.
she's hoping Elisha
position.
can do something
Yeah.
about it. I mean, she takes him up to his bed where no one will see him, shuts the door, and then she hurries as quickly as she can to find the prophet.
Yes.
So again, it's definitely a demonstration of faith,
Yes.
but there's, no need to tell her husband that his son's dead if the man of God can heal him.
Thank you. I think that reveals a great faith. I don't think she thought this was not a big deal. This was obviously, she was feeling terrible about, this is her son. But it's his son as well. But she must have had enough faith to think, well, he said this, I would have a child, and now my child's gone, and I will get my child back. She was obviously thinking these things. What is the husband doing? He's doing his job. He's out there doing whatever he's in the fields that he was supposed to do during the reaping and all these things, or whatever. If they had animals, they would be taking care of those. He was doing his job, and she just saw it as part of what she needed to take care of. And again, for me, that just shows what great character this person has. And I think I just read that, and I think it's pretty amazing. And we're going to get into this question of faith here in a minute. Is there anything else anybody wants to add to this story? I just thought these things just revealed so much about what's going on here. And I just had a note here. She has good motive. She has a good heart. Anything else?
Well, just as she said, this is well, was Gehazi asking her.
Yeah, that was Gehazi asking her. Because she wasn't going to say, that was strange. She wasn't going to say anything about it until she saw the man who promised her this. It's all, unless we put ourselves in their positions, it's just fascinating to read how she was able to keep it close and not just spill out until she actually saw Elisha. And when she saw Elisha, she was ready to tell him what was what. She refuses to let him stay at the house. Now, we're going to see this kind of happen again in the next story. So all these stories are kind of connected. Not the next story, but the next chapter. Okay, anything else? Okay, so these are fascinating to see that people, even people who didn't necessarily believe in God, come away having faith. And this is God working in the world, even though people didn't believe in him. And I think it just shows the importance of people who know God to show who God is. Okay, anything else? Okay, 38 through 41. When Elisha returned to Gilgal, there was a famine in the land as the sons of prophets were sitting before him. He said to his servant, "Put on the large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets." Then one went out to the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine and gathered from its lap full of wild gourds and came and sliced them into the pot of stew, for they did not know what they were. So they poured it out for the men to eat. And as they were eating of the stew, they cried out and said, "O man of God, there is death in the pot," and they were unable to eat. But he said, "Now bring meal." He threw it into the pot and said, "Pour it out for the people, that they may eat." Then there was no harm in the pot. So, don't ever eat gourds that you're not sure of, or maybe any gourd of any type. So, they make the stew, and it's poisonous, and when they taste it, they obviously know it's poisonous, and it doesn't say anybody got sick or died. They just obviously knew that it was not good. And there's this miracle that happens where he puts in some meal, and it is made edible. Is there anything that anybody see? Does anybody see anything in here other than just that? Yeah, I just, I look at this and I just see this as, okay, this is Elisha's time. This is further confirmation that he has this double portion of Elijah, and you're just going to see one miracle after another. Okay, let's finish up 42 through 44. Now a man came from Baal Shalishah and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And he said, "Give them to the people that they may eat." His attendant said, What will I set before 100 men? But he said, "Give them to the people that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left over." So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Lord. So this person brings his first fruit offerings and says, give this to the people to eat. Elisha tells his attendant, and I'm assuming it's Gehazi, but it might not be. He tells him, just, give this to the people. And he says, what, you want me to give this to 100 people? What? Am I reading that right? Does Gehazi or whoever this attendant is, does he have a little attitude about this? What are you asking me to do? Is that correct? Anybody? That's how I read it. I read it like he's saying, this is a lot of food over here. You want me to do that much work? That's a lot of work. And Elijah just says, just give it to the people. There'll be some left over. Don't worry about it. So I don't know who this is, but there's a little bit of a pushback from this servant. So, okay.
Well, I understood him to be saying, this is not enough bread for 100 people. I thought that was his question.
Okay.
How can I set this before these people? It's not enough.
Oh, it's not enough. Okay.
That's kind of how I understood it.
Okay, so there was a miracle here,
Uh-huh.
is the point.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Kind of like Jesus feeding the 5,000 and the
Okay.
4,000.
Okay, so here we're projecting into Christianity again, aren't we? Yeah? Okay, good point. So the question that Barry had in here was, though Israel was extremely wicked, what does this text remind us about the condition of the nation? Did anybody come up with anything for that? Aaron? Still good people. Yeah. Yeah, it's, that's what I thought. It was, they still respect God. And the unfortunate part is, for a lot of them, and we don't know if this was one of the 7,000 or what, but for a lot of people, they would respect God, but they respected God along with whatever God was before they had the golden calves. By this time, likely, the Baals were removed by Jehoram, but God, unfortunately, was just another of other gods to worship. But to Barry's point, yeah, the people still wanted to please God. Like in the very beginning, when they're going to war, there was at least one occasion where they go to war and with Judah, and they're saying, we have God. Yes.
Well, my takeaway was there's always a remnant. And from the
Okay.
time the church was established down through the ages, there has always been a remnant.
Yes. Yeah, Paul talks about that. And it's, well, the scriptures, say that the word of God will never fail. And that's, we like to think it's up to us, but, that's just the power of God. But it is up to us to a certain degree, isn't it? We talk about that all the time, how for some people, we're the only Bible that they have. Okay, anything else about this chapter specifically? Or anything else before this? Okay. All right, so let's get to chapter 5, and this is a fairly long read. I don't know how much we'll get into it. This is a story of Naaman, and there's a lot of things going on here. In my mind, as I've read through it, and then I reread it, and really kind of start to consider each different person, and this is what I want us to do, is we have a lot of different stations in lives here. Different people doing different things, different levels of importance in their life. They have different levels of power, they have different levels of authority, and for me, there's a lot of good things we get from this, not only about our own attitudes, but also how God, this is just God doing what he always does. And again, this is projecting, to me, it's projecting towards Christianity and the Christ. Okay, Verse 1, chapter 5. Now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man, with his master and highly respected, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram, who's an enemy of Israel. How about that? The man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went in and told his master, saying, Thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel. Then the king of Aram said, Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. He departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 changes of clothes. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, And now, as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me. It happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king, saying, Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean. But Naaman was furious and went away and said, Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and would call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are there not Abna and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he returned and went away in a rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, My father had the prophet told you to do some great thing, would you have not done it? How much more then when he says to you, Wash and be clean? So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. When he returned to the man of God with all his company, and came and stood before him, he said, Behold now, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So please take a present from your servant now. But he said, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will take nothing. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Naaman said, If not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules' load of earth. For your servant will no longer offer burnt offering, nor will sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there. And he leans on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. He said to him, Go in peace. So he departed from him some distance. Okay, so we've heard this story so many times. It's a great story. Story of Naaman, and we kind of project out the baptism and dipping in the Jordan and all of that. And there's so much going. It's just so packed with so many things. There are 2 questions here. I wanted to ask this one first. What applications can we make from Naaman's reaction in verses 11 and 12? Now, in verses 11 and 12, he comes to Elisha's house. Elisha doesn't even come out to see him. And wow. So he says, He was furious and went away and said, Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me. He would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord as God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. And then he talks about these other rivers that are much better. They're more beautiful. I mean, you know, a Jordan is a muddy river typically, especially in the spring when it's overflowing. He's thinking of these beautiful, fresh, beautiful, probably trees by the side or something. I don't know, beautiful spot. It's like if you go up to Tahoe or something, have beautiful rivers coming out of there. It's just, but he's looking at this money like. So what do we learn? I think that's his question is, what applications can we make from that? Anybody? Yeah, Aaron. What was going on with Naaman, I guess, is the real question.
Well, it doesn't have to make sense to us, is
Yes.
one thing that we need to learn. That just obedience to the will of God is enough. It doesn't matter what he's asked. It doesn't have to make sense. We like
Yes.
pomp. We like pomp and circumstance. We like a big show. We
Yes.
like fireworks and sparkles. You know, we want something to shine and to. I don't know why, but that's part of our nature, and God sometimes asks us to do simple things, and it takes a little humility to.
Yeah,
to
when
do
he
that.
describes what he was expecting, what was he expecting to at least see? I'm thinking, this is like Harry Potter moment, he brings out his magic wand and cures it, well, I'm going to do it, He was expecting something, this is probably what he was used to seeing, the magicians in his own land, that kind of thing. Your point is absolutely right. That's an issue, and we don't know how God is going to work, right? We don't have to look for the parting of the Red Sea. And in this case, this was a miracle, but we look for so many different things, and a lot of times it's not the miracles that are showing us God's working in our life. And I get it, a lot of people don't want to talk about seeing God work in your life because you're never sure exactly. But, I think to that point, it isn't necessarily going to be some great miracle that happens. It's going to be some other kind of providence that God has for us. Anybody else? Okay. I had basically the same thing. He was looking for this grand gesture, and it just doesn't happen that way. We are never going to be sure how God is going to manifest himself. So this other question, was that the second bell? Thank you. Boy, I wanted to get there. We'll start there. And that was the things that saved Naaman. He was obviously cured by grace, but what else helped save him? Thank you.